Story 1, Clowns and the Concrete Labyrinth of Brooklyn. The memory of that terrifying autumn night is permanently etched into the landscape of my mind, a stark, unwelcome landmark that has colored my perception of the world ever since. It surfaces immediately whenever I contemplate the childish innocence of hide-and-seek played in absolute darkness, or when the ominous shadow of a forgotten urban prospect, a specific kind of desolate alleyway, falls across my path. The events that unfolded that evening were truly unforgettable, marking a definitive, cold-hearted end to any lingering sense of youthful invulnerability. The setting was early October, the air crisp and carrying the first genuine, sharp bite of fall, a season that now feels irrevocably tainted. I was 16 years old, precariously navigating the complex, often turbulent emotional terrain of early adolescence, when my 3 younger siblings and I traveled across town to visit our mother. Her apartment was situated deep within a gritty, intensely packed section of Brooklyn, New York City. My sisters, Kayla, 14, and Darcy, 10, and my brother, Jace, 8, made up our small, protective unit. Our parents' divorce, finalized just over a year prior, meant contact with Mom was agonizingly infrequent. This prearranged visit, facilitated by our father, felt less like a routine trip and more like a precious, vital, and ultimately finite opportunity to reconnect. Mom's building stood in a decidedly uninviting area, hemmed in by a tight cluster of aging, neglected structures. Despite the sheer demographic density of the neighborhood, the visible signs of life and crowding, the environment always exuded a strange, chilling emptiness, a suffocating, almost unnatural silence amidst the expected clamor of the city. Her apartment abutted a long, perpetually shadowed prospect, a narrow, asphalt access lane, that served as the least obvious, most secretive entrance to the complex courtyard. This geographical detail alone was enough to define the sketchiness of the entire locale. A casual, unfamiliar visitor would simply never locate the building unless they were intentionally directed down that extended, forbidding concrete canyon. Our unit was on the second floor, reached by a creaking stairwell, a small sanctuary of warmth in the surrounding grayness. It was a classic NYC walk-up, modest in size, yet overwhelmingly cozy, filled with soft, mismatched furniture, thick rugs, and the comforting clutter of personalized trinkets that instantly reminded me of the unconditional acceptance of a beloved grandparent's home. It was a haven. A small, but important blessing was the presence of the neighbors. We had quickly befriended Ethan, 15, and his younger brother, Sam, 12, who lived directly below us. Ethan, nearly my age, often joined me for pickup games in the worn parking lot adjacent to the ominous prospect. This time, however, with the city preparing for the theatrical chaos of Halloween, Ethan proposed an elevated, more thrilling form of entertainment, nighttime hide-and-seek played entirely outdoors. My younger siblings, sensing the delicious thrill of boundary-pushing transgression, immediately campaigned to join. We collectively decided the game would commence precisely at 9 p.m. The early October twilight meant darkness arrived swiftly, providing the intensely spooky, atmospheric gloom we desired, a gloom that, ironically, would soon turn predatory. All 6 of us gathered, the collective excitement a nervous, electric hum in the air. The silence around the building corners was an irresistible invitation to mischief, though the tall, aged street lamps cast sickly, rusty orange pools of light on the parking tarmac. We used the familiar, rhythmic chant, "Bubblegum, bubblegum," in a dish, to randomly select the seeker. The unfortunate responsibility fell to Ethan. As the count began, everyone scattered into the deep, welcoming shadows. As the eldest and the self-appointed protector, I instinctively stuck close to Kayla. We made a desperate, silent beeline for the rear of the apartment building, seeking refuge near the massive, industrial steel garbage receptacles. Reaching this spot required traversing a significant, almost forbidding portion of the long, dark prospect. Our reasoning was simple and, we thought, flawless. No sane seeker would venture that far into the chilling darkness. We were certain of our foolproof safety. Ready or not, here I come to find the ones I love. Ethan's voice, though muffled by distance, echoed unnervingly, sealing the contract of the game. The initial rush of adrenaline quickly evaporated, replaced by the heavy, suffocating stillness of waiting. All I could hear was the distant, muffled, indifferent thrum of the city and the occasional involuntary sound of our own shallow breathing. After what felt like an eternity, perhaps 10 minutes of absolute immobility, Kayla and I grew profoundly impatient. "I think we've legitimately outsmarted him," I whispered, injecting a false, brittle lightness into my tone. She sighed, her anxiety palpable, suggesting we should just surrender. It was growing too late, and the hiding spot was, quite simply, too effective. We crept out from behind the steel bins and stepped onto the damp, cold, gravelly center of the prospect. The instant my eyes focused on the street exit, my internal sense of safety catastrophically imploded. The fear was physical, like an internal organ seizing up. Standing in the pale, sickly light of the distant street lamp was a figure. Its silhouette was strangely elongated, preternaturally tall, the light source above creating an impenetrable mask of shadow over its head. I instantly, fiercely rejected the idea that this was anyone familiar. But the chilling detail that instantly solidified my panic was the voluminous, brightly colored, frizzy wig, the unmistakable hair of a clown. The worst possible assumption was instantly confirmed. It was far too early for costumed revelers, and the person was utterly motionless, a statue of pure, quiet menace, staring directly at us without moving a muscle. Kayla, immediately sensing the terror that had frozen me, violently tugged me backward, her own voice reduced to a terrified, desperate whisper. We had to find the others. We hurried back toward the courtyard, moving with an unnatural, strained speed. To our immense, fleeting relief, we quickly located Jace and Sam near the complex entrance. Jace was confused by our sudden, exposed appearance. We urgently explained about the disturbing clown in the prospect. From where we stood, the figure was still faintly visible. We moved aside to show them. It was then we understood the true, escalating scope of the terror. The clown was no longer static, it had perceptibly closed the distance, watching us intently, and slowly, deliberately, waving at us with a wide, exaggerated, and utterly horrifying motion. We could now see its face, a sickening mask of solid, featureless black grease paint, deliberately erasing all human identity save for the unsettling pinpricks of its eyes. Then, Sam screamed, pointing frantically behind us, "Oh my God! There's another one!" Indeed, a second clown had silently materialized, this one with green hair and an even more unsettlingly tall, slender frame. That was the final, non-negotiable command for flight. Sam and Jay sprinted away, and we followed without a backward glance. Sam raced to his own apartment, we charged up the groaning stairs to ours. Inside, we found Darcy and Ethan already with Mom. Mom was administering fierce, necessary hugs. Confused, we quickly realized she had already been alerted. Darcy explained her own encounter. She and Ethan had been hiding in the courtyard foliage. When Ethan found her, only a moment later, she looked up and saw a third clown, this one with red hair, looming silently and impossibly over the top of their hiding spot. Ethan and Darcy immediately ran to Mom. We added our chaotic tale of the two clowns in the prospect. Mom, though visibly shaken and pale, was immensely relieved to have all four of us safe, pulling us into a circle of protective, tearful comfort. I desperately hoped the ordeal was over. But the true, final violation of safety was yet to come. Later, in the dead of night, a sharp thirst woke me. As I retrieved a bottle of water from the kitchen, I heard an inexplicable, faint tapping or scraping noise coming from the window, on the second floor. Ignoring every single survival instinct honed by horror movies and common sense, I crept toward the sound, compelled by a paralyzing curiosity. When I tentatively lifted the edge of the blinds, I found myself gazing directly into the obscured, nightmarish face of the clown. It was the same one Kayla and I had seen. He was right there, staring at me from an impossible height, his dark face inches from the glass. I let out a soundless, strangled scream and ran, stumbling, to my mother's side. She rushed out, but when I pointed back, the window was perfectly, innocently empty. Like a cruel, cosmic joke, it was gone. Thankfully, Mom saw the genuine, hysterical terror in my face and believed me completely, staying awake until dawn and keeping every light in the apartment blazing. I still cannot rationally explain how a human being could have scaled the side of that sheer, brick building to reach our second-floor window. The events of that night cemented my deep-seated aversion to hide-and-seek and confirmed the inherent, unsettling menace I now associate with any shadowed, forgotten alleyway. I remain profoundly thankful that the terror never escalated beyond psychological torment, leaving us physically unharmed but permanently scarred. Story 2, The Eerie Watcher of the Sunset Strip Mansion. The narrative I'm about to relay is an account from my most formative, emotionally vulnerable years, occurring when I was 12 years old and firmly entrenched in the sometimes cruel, indifferent world of 7th grade. It pertains to a specific geographical feature of my daily school route that rapidly evolved from a mild discomfort into a source of crippling, sustained dread, warping my understanding of personal safety and reality itself. The middle school I attended in Los Angeles bordered a highly peculiar, forgotten stretch of road that quickly led down toward the illustrious, glittering chaos of the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. Directly facing the school on this side street stood a profoundly neglected, almost Gothic-looking mansion. It was a ruin, weather-beaten, paint peeling in thick, fungal sheets, and truly repulsive to my young, order-loving eyes. The exterior was so dilapidated, so fundamentally wrong, that I couldn't reconcile its continued existence with the idea of ownership. Why would any sane individual live there and tolerate such a grotesque, decaying facade? My friends, Kevin and Rob, found the house a constant source of cynical ridicule on our walk home. I, however, always nervously lectured them, fearing the potential, unseen anger of an adult resident who might be listening. As a child, I was perpetually cautious, deeply, almost pathologically afraid of provoking any form of adult wrath, and my friends never failed to remind me of my inherent scaredy-cat nature. For a time, the walk past the house was merely an uneasy routine, a shared, nervous joke. But when October descended, that month of thin veils and shifting shadows, bringing with it the pressing schedule of after-school activities, Kevin and Rob began staying late. I found myself navigating the route home completely alone, and the atmosphere surrounding the house underwent a chilling, sinister transformation. The escalation began subtly during the second week of October. As I passed the crumbling mansion, I noticed a subtle, yet profound difference. A person was standing perfectly motionless in an upstairs window, framed by the dirty, smeared glass, seemingly gazing directly at me as I walked. I was immediately deeply unnerved, but I tried to convince myself it was a momentary, innocent glance and hurriedly continued on. Yet, the observation became a persistent, daily, horrifying routine, the same anonymous figure, perpetually watching from the same window. I couldn't discern their gender, age, or identity, but the visceral feeling of being deliberately, relentlessly observed filled me with mounting terror. When I told my friends, they dismissed it instantly as an elaborate, preemptive Halloween prank, an adult intentionally attempting to frighten the overly cautious girl they knew so well. I tried desperately to accept their assessment, silently chastising myself for my weak nerves and overactive imagination. The situation intensified dramatically and dangerously just a week before Halloween. Following my usual solo route, my stomach sinking with every step, I noticed a distinct, tall dark silhouette standing not in the window, but on the exposed, broken front porch of the mansion, monitoring my approach with unnerving focus. My fear spiked instantly, transitioning from dread to panic. I tried to project an air of calm bravery, quickening my pace into a near run as I passed the property line. That was the critical, irreversible moment when things violently spiraled out of control. As I drew level with the house, the figure suddenly seemed to launch down the steps with an alarming, inhuman burst of speed and instantly began to chase me. A primal, terrified scream tore from my throat, and I ran harder than I ever had in my life. The effort was futile, the pursuit was relentless, and my pursuer, seemingly possessed of unnatural speed, was closing the gap quickly. The voice, a coarse, guttural shout, confirmed it was a man. He was yelling a chaotic torrent of incoherent, meaningless phrases that only amplified the sheer, existential panic. I knew I needed to find immediate, absolute sanctuary. Without thinking, I veered violently into a narrow, disgustingly filthy service alley and squeezed myself behind a vile, reeking dumpster, desperately attempting to control my ragged breathing and silence the frantic thumping of my heart. I could hear the man's heavy, pounding footsteps skid to a halt right at the alley entrance, followed by a heavy silence. Then came the sound of low, indistinct muttering as he slowly, deliberately advanced toward the dumpster where I was crouched. My heart was a frantic, unbearable drum against my ribs. I was absolutely convinced he would peek around the rusting metal container and find me. I could hear his deep, rasping breath so close that I was certain I was about to be discovered, my fragile hiding spot exposed. But then, to my profound, life-saving astonishment, his footsteps suddenly ceased, turned, and then ran away, retreating back down the street at a full sprint. I remained frozen there, curled up and paralyzed, forcing myself to wait what felt like an hour until I was absolutely certain he was gone. When I finally dared to move, my legs shaking uncontrollably, I sprinted the remaining distance home. Bursting through the door, I collapsed, hysterically telling my parents everything. My father, recognizing the raw, genuine terror in my voice, immediately contacted the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD. The officers arrived and I recounted the traumatic events, pointing out the specific, frightening mansion. They were professional, but vague, promising an update the following day. True to their word, they returned with a shocking and disorienting report. The house had been officially condemned and vacant for years. No one was in legal residence. Furthermore, they confirmed that the windows I claimed to have seen the figure in had been boarded up from the inside, making the sighting of a static figure logically, physically impossible. The police suggested that a paranoid transient or squatter must have been temporarily using the derelict house and, for some bizarre, violent motivation, decided to terrorize me. No arrests were ever made. When I told Kevin and Rob, even their deep-seated skepticism was shattered. To this day, even now, at 24 years old, I am terrified of derelict or abandoned buildings, feeling a phantom presence watching me. The incident remains impossibly vivid, particularly the logical contradiction of the man in the window and the chilling realization that my pursuer willingly aborted the chase when he was mere feet away from me, a fact that suggests not random madness, but cold, deliberate calculation. Story 3, The Silent Vigil of the Colorado High Country. My residence is in a relatively isolated, serene mountainous community situated near the internationally renowned, picturesque resort town of Aspen, Colorado. Here, in the high country, the rural sensibilities are strong, and though contemporary culture has introduced some Halloween observance, many older, traditional residents still view the holiday with deep, conservative skepticism. I was 20 years old at the time, navigating the freedoms of early adulthood, and I had established a firm routine of walking my large, powerfully built canine companion, Thorn, late in the evenings. Thorn was highly muscular and intensely territorial, exhibiting a tendency to bark relentlessly and aggressively at children, joggers, and cyclists, which made daytime walks a source of constant embarrassment and stress. The cloak of late evening darkness offered a perfect, secluded solution. In the autumn, the darkness descends swiftly and completely, settling deep into the valleys. 8 p.m. feels functionally like midnight, and visibility is zero without artificial light. That evening, I set out with Thorn. My preferred route was a specific, isolated access road that led from the local general store, past my house, toward an ancient, historical stone church, a beautiful, solid structure standing watch over the valley. The walk itself was short, perhaps 10 minutes. The landscape was sharply defined by the deep shadow of the whispering pine forest on one side and a sprawling, quiet cattle ranch on the other. At night, this path was utterly, completely abandoned, save for the wildlife. I cherished the contemplative atmosphere of late fall, the cold, clean air, the rhythmic, satisfying crunch of pine needles beneath my boots, and the profound, almost spiritual sense of solitude. I walked lost in thought, letting my mind wander, approaching the termination of the road where the forest encroached upon an old, heavily decaying stable that belonged to the church parish. It was a picturesque ruin, officially decommissioned and unused for several decades. Suddenly, Thorn shattered the profound silence, erupting into a violent, guttural fit of barking and snarling. I was instantly jolted from my peaceful reverie, frantically scanning the environment for the usual culprits, a deer, a bear, or another dog, but Thorn's absolute focus was locked entirely on the cluster of the stable and the trees behind it. Visibility was terrible, the ancient streetlights were dim, casting only feeble, sickly pools of light. Thorn was acting completely unhinged, straining against his heavy leash with a desperate, panic-driven intensity that was fundamentally uncharacteristic even when confronting his rivals. I squinted intently into the pitch darkness of the trees to determine the precise source of his profound distress. Then I saw it, an estimated 30 to 60 feet away, partially concealed by the deep shadow cast by the dilapidated stable. I distinctly discerned the silhouette of a person. My initial rationalization was to dismiss it, a bizarre shadow, a discarded piece of wood, but as I focused my gaze, the unmistakable human form became terrifyingly clear. The figure's clothing seemed to faintly catch and reflect the minimal moonlight filtering through the pines, suggesting it was clothed entirely in white. The person was kneeling, with a straight, rigid, almost unnatural posture, not fully hidden but deliberately positioned to avoid the main street light. A wave of intense, physiological dread washed over me. I realized the white clothing was a long, sweeping, almost ceremonial-looking robe or vestment. The figure was completely static, not moving a single muscle, yet its head was turned, and it was deliberately, patiently staring directly in my direction. I pulled violently on the leash, hissing at Thorn to move, but he resisted, a fixed point of pure animal terror and resistance. I instantly decided I could not, remain there for another second. I grabbed his harness with my free hand and began a forced, desperate power walk. I consciously fought the urge to run, fearing that any sudden, panicked movement might provoke the individual into action, confirming that I had seen him. Thankfully, the church entrance was less than a minute away, and I could faintly see the vague, comforting forms of a few people lingering nearby. I briefly entertained the desperate thought of telling them, but the story seemed too utterly bizarre, a silent figure in a white robe, kneeling by a collapsing stable. The remainder of my walk home was filled with a paralyzing, extreme tension. I compulsively glanced back every few steps, my neck stiffening with every turn. Even Thorn seemed subdued, his tail lowered, walking quickly and efficiently beside me. I reached home safely, locked the door, and sank onto the floor, shaking. But the episode was not concluded. That night, I was violently awakened from a shallow sleep by the deafening sound of multiple sirens echoing through the valley. They wailed for an unbearable half-hour, a chilling symphony of emergency. The next morning, I saw on the local Aspen news that the priest's stable had been completely gutted by fire. The initial, easy consensus was that irresponsible, drunk teenagers or some bizarre, escalating prank was responsible. But I knew what I had seen. I had not witnessed adolescent mischief. The person I observed looked terrifyingly composed and deliberate, like a silent sentinel awaiting a preordained signal. I often wonder if there were others hidden within the unstable structure, and I am profoundly grateful that my view was limited to that single, unnerving figure. I vehemently resist the urge to draw a dramatic, immediate causal connection, but the sight of a figure in a white robe, silently kneeling near the very structure that was intentionally destroyed by fire several hours later, remains the most profoundly unsettling coincidence of my life. The most persistent, maddening question that haunts me is the sheer time frame. At least 5 to 6 hours elapsed between my sighting and the initial alarm of the fire. Was that person kneeling there, utterly motionless and unseen, for the entire duration? What kind of dark ritual, preparation, or vigil could necessitate such an extreme, silent commitment? I am immensely relieved that the figure chose neither to follow nor to acknowledge my presence, and that Thorn's instinctual resistance prevented me from approaching any closer. If that individual, or group, was capable of committing arson on that scale, the calculated destruction of property, I dread to imagine what other acts of violence they might have been capable of committing against a human being. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.